Welcome back to Analysis, where we've been looking at what many people judge to be a counter-revolution in Egypt. In this half, we'll be looking at the social and economic aspects of the crisis in Egypt. My studio guests from the first half of the programme have all rejoined me, and we're also pleased to welcome Lubna Hossam on the phone from Berlin. Lubna is from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Sabah, there's still a profound economic crisis. It's not being made any better by the instability in Egypt. Do you think that one possible thing that may happen to the military government is that its plans can be upset by protests which are sparked from this rather than from the effects of the coup?
Well, I don't think this is going to be the reason why they have the economic problems. The economic problems has been compounded to start with the first revolution against Mubarak, then the coup d'etat against it, then the abuse of power at the present moment. And I must say, at this point, I find it incredible that the world community, indeed even the international community, is not objecting to the idea of retroactive legislation in the criminal side. The Muslim Brotherhood was a legitimate organization. To decide now that it is illegitimate and to take it back to the people, this is really an abuse of the basic of human rights. We haven't heard anything from the United Nations. We haven't heard from many of the other countries. But I think this is going to, the economic consequences and the social consequences is a result of this abuse and the widening of the abuse. So everybody is being labeled in one way or another. You have even people who were against Morsi, artists and literate people and liberal movement and journalists. Now they are facing the problem. There is this wide brush, and it is expanding to all sectors. Even the business sector, who used to back the government, are going to pull out. You have the problem, there was some finance coming from the Gulf, Abu Dhabi and UAE and Qatar and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. This is going to dry out in the normal Arab process, whereby they promise and then they don't deliver. This is going to have consequences, further consequences. So you have a multiple and a cumulative effect of the current policies of the government.
Lubna, let me just bring you into this discussion at this point. I mean, from your point of view, do you think that the kind of continuing economic instability is going to make what is already a very difficult situation impossible to stabilise for the people who've led the coup?
Yeah, most definitely. I really believe that. I mean, yeah. There's no discussion that it was a coup, and there's no discussion that the revolution has been hijacked. And what I'm trying to say is that Egypt is in a very precarious situation. I could even describe it in the following manner. It's like a stick of dynamite just waiting to explode. You can't keep pressing people for this amount of time, and people went onto the streets and demanded a change of regime. And what happened? We had democratic elections. We had a democratically elected president who I did not vote for, but who was democratically elected, and the army stepped in and removed him from power. This is not the way democracy works, and it's not very credible to the world community, in my opinion, to do business in such a manner. It's not a commitment to democracy. You cannot push every single time you want to change something. You have to let the ballot boxes decide. You have to let people go to the ballot boxes and say, well, listen, we don't think Morsi's doing a good job. Well, we'll vote against him. And we'll vote for somebody else the next time. That's my opinion. And I think it is a precarious situation. I think it's a dangerous situation. But I don't really, I'm not a real fan of worst case scenarios, but I still would keep my eye on things at the moment.
Tab, do you think that the referendum, when it happens, do you think it will be so illegitimate in the eyes of so many Egyptians that whatever comes after it won't stick as any kind of settlement, even in the terms of the people who conducted the coup?
Well, John, I'm glad you're talking about the referendum, because I don't quite understand who the military regime in Egypt is trying to fool, because clearly its own population is crying out in respect to what's happening at the moment. There are daily protests, and this is not just from the Muslim Brotherhood, this is from all aspects of Egyptian society now. And what kind of referendum can you hold in a situation where you detain thousands of people arbitrarily, and in those circumstances you repress a significant proportion of the opposition group, the Muslim Brotherhood, as you know, that has now been proscribed as a terrorist organisation. You can't have a free and fair election in those circumstances. The referendum is simply a self-endorsement by the military regime to say, look, we held elections. There's no accountability in respect to those elections. And even if there was accountability in respect to those elections, and let's say, for example, there was out of the turnout, how do you quantify the turnout? Out of the turnout, if there was an overwhelming vote in favour of the referendum, what does that mean in a circumstance where going to the ballot box and putting your vote against the referendum may result in you being detained or shot?
John, this question of retroactive legislation that Sabah was raising, how unusual is it, even in regimes which are undemocratic and that are condemned for human rights abuses? How unusual is it to be instituting crimes on people that didn't even know they were committing them at the time?
Well, it's not only unusual; it's totally contrary to the rule of law and to all international human rights conventions and domestic constitutions. So it's a basic principle of justice, and it's completely offensive.
What I'm trying to get at, I guess, is this: that that Mohammed was saying, that and Sabah, that we all knew, anybody who was in Egypt under the Mubarak regime knew that it was a repressive regime. But even it didn't go that far. And I guess what I'm asking is, on the spectrum of undemocratic regimes, how unusual is it to be using this kind of retrospective legislation?
Oh, it's certainly very unusual, and for that reason, most international human rights conventions do condemn retrospective legislation.
Let me just ask you about the economic situation here. I mean, it's a kind of underreported element of the original revolution, but the bread question was very definitely there. Do you think do you, from your point of view, see that as something that's going to deepen the protests, even if the process of the coup seems to be kind of suppressing protests at the moment?
I was surprised this morning when they announced that they're going to start the project of Suez Canal, which they stole it actually from the program of President Morsi as well. And they tried to do something just to show to the Egyptian people and the international community that they're going to solve the economic problem. But the reality is a lot of investors, either local or international or coming from abroad, they already closed their factories. They already escaped from the country. They took their assets and their money out of the country. They tried to attract the investors to come back. That will not happen, even they do their referendum or not, because there is no stability, there is no security, there is no safety. The police is now not fighting the thieves in the street. They are fighting the protest. They have no time. The army is not protecting our borders. They are fighting the protesting people in the street. Then how come to any kind of investor to come to the country like this? Most of the investors escape from Egypt. Economy is going down. A lot of people lost their jobs. There's no any opportunity for a job for more than now. The unemployment in Egypt going more than 14%. And then it's crazy. Whatever they do, they are doing the supporting from the AU or from the Gulf countries. That will not keep going forever. They will give up someday, and then it's going down, not going better.
Lubna, just want to ask you about the kind of the international reaction to events in Egypt now. I mean, just talk us through what you think of the kind of the main responses. Perhaps starting with the US, because it seems that it's got a kind of remarkably kind of hands-off attitude now. Do you think that it basically thinks that it can't get a twist on what's happening in Egypt, or do you think it's happy with the coup?
No, I don't think it's happy with the coup. I mean, that was fairly clear when they curtailed their military aid. I mean, that was a very clear signal towards Egypt, but also towards Israel and towards Saudi Arabia, who were actually pleading to have this aid kept. And the US definitely said, no, we don't condone what's happening, and we're taking a stance. I mean, I see this from a European perspective, and I obviously know a lot more about what the Europeans are saying. But I can certainly say what analysts like Nathan Brown from Carnegie have been saying as well, that it's problematic that the army just took the revolution and twisted it to its own means. And the problem is also that this was a revolution of the people, not of the army. This was a revolution against the old regime. And what has happened? We have the old regime again. Okay, we have it without Mubarak and without Al-Adli, but more or less it's the same old regime. So
just on this question of international response, I mean, you were saying, you know, that that the Americans suspended some aid, but then there was a very interesting moment when the Egyptian government accepted aid from Russia as a kind of tit for tat. Is that how you read it? They're saying, okay, you guys, you can do this, but we can do that.
Yeah, and I suppose it was also a sign of a certain signal of desperation. I mean, and also sending back the signal, well, you're not the only people who can give us aid. You know, you're not the only people we can ask for money here. So I don't know if it was that contemplated. On the other hand, you have to see that since Nasser and up to Sadat's time, you had a relationship with the Soviet Union, which delivered aid to Egypt. So there's this history of a relationship between Russia and Egypt. So, and this turn away from socialism on the part of Sadat is also something relatively new, and a lot of people were not happy with that. And Mubarak certainly exacerbated the situation by removing the social services which had been put in place by Nasser. So okay. I think you can see it from that perspective as well.
Saba, I mean, perhaps we've talked about a lot of things that are unhappy and unwelcome developments in Egypt, but is one thing that's happening that the internal events of the Egyptian revolution have become so complex now that none of the major powers are really able to intervene effectively in it. I mean, that may be a short-term thing. Do you read it like that, or do you still think that they think they've got a sort of, I mean, they can't think that they've got the same kind of relationship with the Egyptian government that they had under the Mubarak regime?
No, I think the Western powers have changed their views over the last 3-4 years. There was an idea that any Islamic of any sort is a bad thing. So they had Islamist and all sorts of terminology used for Al-Qaeda. Everybody was Al-Qaeda. Then they realized that it is part of the identity of the people in that part of the world, whether we like it or we don't. So we have to begin to address it and accept it somehow. When they began to do that, they fell into the trap of, for instance, now the Egyptian government is accusing the Americans of supporting the Brotherhood. And they are saying that Al-Qaeda is working with the Brotherhood and Qatar is working with the Brotherhood. So you end up with everybody, including the Russians, are working with the Brotherhood. The relationship between the Russians and Egypt finished with a long time ago. All the military has become Westerner. The economy has become a liberal economy. They cannot go back now to the Soviet era or the centralized economy. That's why they have the problem. The finance which is coming from the Gulf is a finance which doesn't touch the people, because it's one thing you give the credit of so many billions to the budget so that the Egyptian pound does not fall down, but it's another to find jobs for the people. Mm-hmm. That money which is being given is not going to it's not going into the project, it's not going to the people. It's something like figures affecting the economic situation, the value of the Egyptian pound and the ability to borrow money and all this, that and the other. But Mr. Average Egyptian has seen nothing. He's just there. The ordinary person is seeing his life getting worse by the day, regardless of the billions they're talking about.
Mohammed, I mean, what do you make of the attitude of the Americans to the situation in Egypt now? I mean, the accusation from the government is that they're supporting the Brotherhood. Do you feel very supported?
This is a game This is a media game. They always play it like this. Now we saw a lot of videos, watch a lot of videos that in the Congress, especially the committee of the Foreign Relations Committee, that they said that they are against the Muslim Brotherhood. They are against the Morsi's regime. They should support the coup authority or the army authority. This is the reality, because it's very easy to deal with a dictatorship or dictatorial regime more than the United States to deal with a democracy regime, as Morsi's was. And this is the reality. The United States always wants to deal in our region with any kind of dictatorial regime. It's easy for them to their benefits in the region, especially to support Israel, to support the security of Israel. There's no way to say that the United States at any time they are with the Muslim Brotherhood or something like this. This is a fake. It is not true.
John, how do you see the sort of international politics in relation to the court case? Because these kind of high-profile international cases are rarely only legal processes. They have a political dimension. How do you see that?
Well, I think the political issue in this case is whether the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court will be influenced by political considerations, or whether she will adopt a purely legal attitude towards the case. And our argument is that in law, the International Criminal Court is required to consider and to investigate crimes that have been committed in Egypt. There may be political factors that compel the International Criminal Court or try to persuade the International Criminal Court not to exercise jurisdiction, but I think that will be completely improper. I think from a legal point of view, the International Criminal Court is required to exercise jurisdiction.
Do you think that's how it will play out, or do you think that the political considerations might, however regretfully, play some role?
Well, there's always a chance that political considerations may influence legal decisions, and that's, of course, not proper. I'm quite confident, actually, that the political considerations in respect of Egypt will allow the International Criminal Court to do what it's supposed to do.
Why do you think that? Just sort of walk us through why you think that would be the case.
Well, look, the international community, and I'm talking about two aspects of the international community. In our current modern age, you can sit in your living room as an ordinary citizen in London or in some part of England and see what happened in Rabat Square on the 14th play out in your living room. And that disturbs people across the globe. And that pressure is the pressure that will influence governments across the globe to then allow the International Criminal Court to do what it wants to do, to do what it needs to do. And I think at the moment we have a situation where there isn't any special protection given to the state of Egypt. You may argue in the other work that we've done previously that in respect of, for example, war crimes in Israel, there has been a massive political interference with legal work. I don't see that in this particular case. And I think the International Criminal Court should be brave enough to do what it thinks is right in accordance with the rule of law. And I don't think really political interference will have an effect.
So perhaps, John, the deteriorating situation, the sort of ongoing repression may actually work to make the court more alert to the problem that you're putting before it.
Certainly, I think that as the situation deteriorates, the likelihood that the court will exercise jurisdiction must intensify.
And what would be the outcome if you won your case? What would happen as a result?
Well, all we are asking is that the International Criminal Court initiate investigations with a view to prosecution of those responsible for committing international crimes, a crime against humanity in particular. We're not saying that the military regime is the only regime responsible for the commission of international crimes, but it seems to be the primary suspect, and so all international crimes committed in Egypt since the overthrow of the Morsi regime must be investigated.
I mean, if that were to come to pass, Sabah, that would be a kind of significant political interruption into events, wouldn't it?
Well, I think it's very important that things of that nature should be taken on board and should be tried, because at the end of the day, maybe the international politics will not necessarily change the world, but one it gives the moral authority, and sometimes it may work. And in this instance, if the court was minded and was able to actually take the practical steps, that would bring in, one, pressure on the government in Egypt, and they may change their mind. Secondly, it will withdraw this pretense of legitimacy, and it will make the other countries feel ill at ease to deal with the